Compared with what had preceded it, the demolition of the Coffer Dam above what had once been the Long Sault Rapids was a small event. It was simply the finishing touch of a 5-year project that was destined to change the face of Canada, turning cities thousands of miles inland into seaports and bringing hydro to millions. It was in 1954 that the governments of Canada and the United States finally initiated one of the greatest engineering projects the world had known, the St. Lawrence Seaway. It had employed 500 engineers, 22,000 skilled construction workers working around the clock, and ultimately cost $1 billion. The governments of both countries knew the investment would be returned at least 100-fold. But for that, another price had to be paid, one perhaps not so easily measured in dollars and cents. To clear the last 35-mile bottleneck along this 2,500-mile waterway, entire communities would have to either get out of the way or at least back up. Our story is about these communities and their citizens. This is Point Iroquois, its name and the town behind it taking their names from those who were the area's first inhabitants. When the voyageurs started arriving, the Indians' hostility towards the French did not stop them trading with them. Later, they became close allies with British settlers. But it was not until the years following the American War of Independence that we have a record of more permanent settlements. United Empire Loyalists began arriving in the 1780s as their loyalty to the British monarchy resulted in their expulsion from the newly independent United States. They were Canada's first refugees.
Some of these loyalists, they were from all walks of life, although, as we said earlier, the majority were farmers that settled in this immediate area. But not all of them were. Some of them had been in business in New York State, the source of most of the loyalists that came to this area. And they went into business. Some of them didn't pick up their lots. They sold them, sometimes for a paltry amount, and established a business, particularly when the villages began to grow. And these started to grow fairly early, provided there were economic reasons for a village to grow in a particular area. I grew up in the village of Altsville prior to the Seaway and began my teaching career there. And in that case, it was right on the river for one thing. What we call the Altsville Creek flowed out through the village, and one of the earliest settlers there, actually, the village grew on his land grant, Nicholas Alt. They had the foresight to dam the creek and build a sawmill on the creek, which was one of the reasons for the growth of a village there.
Once you get to 1784, you have people in considerable numbers, namely the United Empire Loyalists, living along the shores of the St. Lawrence and continuing right on up through to Toronto and the Niagara region. And you have to get supplies to these people, and they have to bring some of their produce to market. So yes, before that, you had the fur trade. But after that, you have settlement. And when you have settlement, people look for improvements in transportation, communication, the whole bit.
With the end of the American War of Independence, it was not long before relations with communities on the other side of the river resumed and commerce picked up. But British authorities remained suspicious of U.S. intentions towards Upper Canada. One result was the 125-mile Rideau Canal between Ottawa and Kingston, which was constructed to allow the transport of goods from Montreal up the Ottawa River and then down into Lake Ontario without fear of ambush. By 1851, the St. Lawrence had replaced the Ottawa-Rideau system as the major waterway from Montreal to the Great Lakes. Traffic increased so dramatically that the government turned around and launched yet another program of building and rebuilding that carried on into the new century and remained unparalleled until the coming of the present Seaway. In its wake came the era of the 14-footers.
Now, as the immigration into the hinterland and all the way out west continued, and the production of these people continued to rise, they could see that it was necessary to expand the system to carry a greater volume of merchandise. So beginning in the late 1880s, they constructed an even bigger system that led to the 14-foot canals. So the ships were 250 feet long. They were 43 to 44 feet wide, and loaded, they had a 14-foot draft. Now, if you look at the type of trade that was established, they developed the coal mines down in the eastern areas of the United States, and they were bringing that coal to Great Lakes ports in Lake Erie and also on Lake Ontario. So they load these ships and they would take coal down to the lower St. Lawrence ports, Montreal, Three Rivers, Quebec City, and so on. They would bring pulpwood back to the mills. There was a pulpwood dock right across from us over at Waddington, New York. There was another one in Ogdensburg, and there was one up in the Welland Canal. They would also bring a tremendous amount of grain downbound. Just about every downbound ship had a load of grain in her holds. Then there was the passenger trade. There was a summer excursion was a great thing to get out on these passenger ships, and they would run down through the rapids outside of the locks, and then they would use the canals to get back up. When you say 14-foot canals, really you're talking about 14-foot draft. You compare that to today's draft of 26'6". The 14-foot draft canals, the ships would go through carrying a cargo of 2,500 tons. Today's cargoes are 25,000 tons, so they went 10 times bigger. Well, as our commerce continued to grow, we needed to be able to compete. The only way you can get your product to market competitively is you have to reduce your transportation costs. So it was worth the investment to rebuild the St. Lawrence River Waterway and provide a shipping channel that would carry 10 times as much cargo per ship. The other thing is we also got the benefit of the hydroelectric power generated down at Cornwall, the big Moses Saunders hydroelectric dam.
As they've watched 200 years of change and development on the St. Lawrence, the residents along its banks between Cornwall and Iroquois can lay rightful claim to the name River People. But they have not been so short-sighted as to neglect the fertile farm and dairy land behind them. The population of the area was never that large, numbering in the low thousands. But along its length and breadth in time, a visitor would find scores of flour mills, carriage factories, sawmills, and other light industries. One settler who came to the area was Michael Cook of Altsville, who has left his own special legacy behind him. In the early 1880s, he bought a bull and 9 cows of a breed little known at the time. Today, the records indicate that virtually every Holstein herd in Canada can trace its origins back to Cook's purchase.
The effect from the Seaway was interesting at the time, because as a young teenager, you couldn't help but be aware of all the excitement and the change of things that were happening. The downside to that at the time was that it was very hard for people who were continuing to farm to keep the farm laborers, because there were all kinds of opportunities to work on the Seaway at 3 and 4 times the wages that a farmer could pay them. The plus to that was, though, of course, it gave a lot of people the opportunity to get started farming. And because this is predominantly a dairy area and very strong Holstein breed area, it gave a lot of people the chance to accumulate some money to get a start.
Well, we were in the poor part of the agricultural land in the 3rd concession where I was in Williamsburg. Was raised there, my dad was raised there, my grandfather was raised there. And it's poor farmland, really. So it was a struggle, life was a struggle throughout, but I think, you know, you're never poor when nobody has any money, so everybody's equal, you know, you don't mind it so much. But I remember my first job was in the township of Williamsburg, cutting brush and doing things on the roads. It was 17.5 cents an hour, with $1.75 a day, and I figured it was a position, not a job. People were working 50 cents a day on a farm. And I told that story in my retirement that, you know, that was the first job I had that I thought was really something, eh? Somebody's making 50 cents, you're making $1.75, you're doing pretty good, eh? So anyway, up till the time of the Seaway, wages was never much more than 50 to 70 cents an hour. I worked in the foundry here at Mooresburg I believe in 54. I think it was 54, 55, long in there. I think 65 to 70 cents is what I got there an hour. So when I got my first job with Beaver Construction in the Seaway as a carpenter, I got $2.35 an hour, which was, you know, an amount, a sum of money that I never thought I'd ever see the day I'd earn. You know, that's a lot of money when you're working 50 cents an hour. But we had a scrub herd, and I always had thoughts of having a good herd of cattle and a better farm. We didn't have the best land. But anyway, that's what the Seaway done for me. It allowed me to bring the money home and build a herd of registered Holsteins. And that was done over a period of about 10 years.
My children, my grandchildren, are the 9th generation on that farm. So, and we're still there. I've been here for about 65 years, out here. I grew up in Ottawa. It's wonderful to see the boats, and I'm very keen on trees, and I like to grow them, and I do. And the children learn to swim in the river, and it was swift before the Seaway in front of us, but not that bad. We swam in it wasn't the canal, it was the river. And my sons are very keen boaters, and my daughters too. And they all know how to swim, or knew how to swim when they were very young, and they knew how to run a boat.
The time was right, and despite heavy opposition, an agreement between Canada and the U.S. was signed, and the first sod was turned near Cornwall in 1954. The plan was simple in its scope, but complex in its detail. All locks would be 800 feet in length and 80 feet wide. Channels in and out of them were taken to a depth of 27 feet. In the international section, a dam and powerhouse at Barnhart Island would tap the power of the Long Sault, and a dam at Point Iroquois would create a 30-foot deep lake, reducing the number of canals along that stretch to 1 upstream and 2 downstream. But that lake would create other big changes. For the residents of Morrisburg and Iroquois, it meant large sections of their communities would disappear. For smaller villages like Wales, Mille Roche, Altsville, and Farron's Point, they would disappear entirely.
So if you're a homeowner, you had one outlook, where am I going to be and what's my home going to be look like when I move and so on. And if you're a worker involved in the thing, it was a little different outlook. It was quite an upheaval quite a number of people were moved, and although the house moving operation of Ontario Hydro moved, I think it was 525 houses. There was other houses moved too. There was people that took settlements. You could make your own settlement with the hydro, and if you wanted to keep your own house and move it yourself, there was some of that done. There was some where the houses weren't movable, so they were paid a cash settlement, and there was in a few cases where the hydro built them a house. So there was a lot of different types of deals made and a lot of different types of operations. There was quite a few private moves going on as well. Like lots of times you could see a house coming up the road that was just moved by somebody else, and that was kind of interesting too. I remember one that come up Old Highway number 2 and it was coming around a curve which was super elevated, you know, one side much higher than the other, and there was a guide rail around one side and a swamp, and it ended up upside down in the swamp.
The whole house? The
whole house. So they just went back and picked up another house they liked and bought it and moved it. Very simple. You had a choice. The biggest thing in the rehabilitation, the most spectacular thing, of course, was the house mover. But there was, you know, they were putting in sewer and water, they were putting up water tanks, they were putting in sewage treatment plants. So there was, and roads. Number 2 highway, there was a stretch of it from I believe somewhere east of Iroquois to almost Ingleside that didn't get paved in the fall, and that was gravel all winter. And it was, depending on the day you went down there, it got awful sloppy, and you didn't have very good windshield washers and so on, and in fact you didn't have windshield washers in some of the cars. It was very bad until the spring, until they were able to pave it. But basically, it went very well. There was a real tight timetable. The New York Power Authority and the Ontario Hydro, the Seaway Authority, which made it was manned by two governments, American and Canadian. They shared the project, shared the cost for about 5 years after. I think all the cleanup and adjustments and so on was still shared as far as the cost was concerned. So it was a tremendous operation. It'd be very difficult to do it today.
It moved relatively quickly. Back in the 50s, you could do big development projects and do them pretty quick. Didn't need to do environmental impact statements and things like that. And Robert Moses was chairman of the Power Authority, the New York Power Authority at the time, and in development of this system and partnership with Ontario and partnership between the United States and Canada, really, with development of the St. Lawrence Seaway and the locks in Messina, was just a tremendous project. I was a small child at the time that the project was built, and my father and mother were fascinated with the project, as were a lot of people, both in Cornwall and Messina, and spent a lot of time as a kid watching this project be built. And then in schools at the time, the schools were just packed with construction workers at the time. Really, these communities experienced tremendous impacts at the time of construction. There were so many people here. But the big impact in Messina was after the dam was built and operational, Alcoa had made a commitment to expand their facility substantially. And at the same time, the New York Power Authority, in concert with the state, at the time it was Governor Harriman, were able to attract facilities of Reynolds Metals, another aluminum company in the States, and General Motors.
Now, it was a very rugged job. We put the sewer water in and put the foundations in the town of Iroquois. We never had a lunchroom. For 2 winters, we worked continually outside from morning till night, never seen inside. At 11:30, you'd put a fire on down in the trench and hang your lunch bucket up and thaw the sandwiches out. Everything froze like a rock. And, but you just toughened up to that. I never really minded it. The only thing you ever minded or was afraid of, you was going to get laid off on Friday night, you know. It was very interesting, especially the new towns. The foundations that I worked on was amazing with all the measurements. They give you a blueprint of the old houses. You'd never had seen a house moved. So there was the measurements on all sides of that house, and none of them would be the same. Then they'd give the diagonals across the corners, and they would be up to 2 feet out. And you just was putting in concrete and saying, how is it possible anything can fit that? And yet it did. So it was amazing with the instrumentation they had that they was able to do this.
It was very difficult. When you get 1 or 2 houses, I've forgotten who the first, I think it was Charlie Roberts, was the first one to live in the new site. And you got to remember, they were hauling the town from here back about a mile, back here, where it is now. And they had an old dirt road with the earth movers. You've seen pictures of these, and they were huge. And dust, and there wasn't a forest ranger around because the bulldozer operators, if they saw a tree, boom, it was gone. So we were bare and dusty. If it rained in that dust that I was referring, a real sea, so of mud. So there they were, able to walk on this catwalk about as wide as that. Well, it was fun, I can tell you. I got some unusual meals from a very disgruntled wife. But I could understand her position. I'm out in the old town trying to run a store. There are 20 customers back in the new town, and they're phoning out their orders. You've got to try and get them to them. Well, I don't know whether you've driven around the town, but up at the west end by the boating docks and boathouses and so forth, where that red sign is, yeah. Well, up that way is the old number 2, which comes right down there. And there was a powerhouse right there. And we were optimistic to the extent that they put a huge sign up, about 12 by 12 or something like that. And it did say, we have to go, but watch us grow. And I guess maybe that would indicate that we were rather optimistic that something big was about to take place.
The rapid progress being made with the dams and locks along the system kept up pressure on the 7 communities to complete their metamorphosis. Schools, churches, and municipal landmarks that had stood for decades were methodically leveled in preparation for the flood. Fire was allowed to reduce other buildings to rubble. Soon there was nothing but the memories. There was an expectation of big things among those who gathered on the riverbanks the morning of July 1st, 1958. If they had expected a great rush of water with the release of the cofferdam, they were sadly disappointed. But not the project's engineers. They were delighted with the rapid elevation of the water over the next few days, and by July 4th, were able to announce that the first of the generators at the power dam was already in operation. This was the same day the new locks on the American side began operations. The old 14-foot system was now history.
The river is quite a bit slower than it used to be. We used to have a heavy current at one time. I think the people have accepted it pretty well. I like it. I don't know. Maybe I'm partial. Maybe other people don't like it.
In the 4 decades since, the new towns have embraced modern living without losing sight of their history. The new schools provided modern educational facilities, preparing children to pursue jobs and businesses in the region. In keeping with the times, chambers of commerce in all the communities can offer fully serviced industrial sites to those in search of land and are confident they can persuade you of their advantages. These are the St. Lawrence Parks, and the jewel in their crown is here at Upper Canada Village, a few miles east of Morrisburg. It was established in 1955 under the auspices of the Ontario St. Lawrence Development Corporation. The village lies adjacent to some 800 hectares of parkland, which includes another structure which had to move out of the Seaway's path, the monument to the 1813 Battle of Chrysler's Farm. Nearby can be found ample swimming facilities, campgrounds, and picnic areas. The old canals have been put to good use as boat marinas, which support one of the greatest recreational water systems in the world. There are recreational activities for all ages, many of which operate year-round, and excellent accommodation for families or large bus tours. Business continues to prosper as well. Many different industries have come to this area over the years and stayed due to the excellent transportation systems, strategic location, reliable workforce, and a very high standard of living. The force of this great river generates energy for 2 countries and nourishes the prosperous and friendly communities along its banks.
Lots of people will say, oh, we like the old towns and the old main street on Saturday nights and so forth. But I don't know, time changes, I guess. You have to move along with the times.